Staying on the same topic, members of council, as Emma mentioned, this area has been designated a brownfield. Part of our analysis and when we briefed individual council members was all of the different samples that are required by Miami-Dade County Durham on that site. Since that part, and we discussed it briefly with our legal counsel, Michael Goldstein, who's our brownfield expert, who's here tonight, and I'm going to have him come up for a second. Miami-Dade County Durham has requested that we expand the well sites, and one of the areas, obviously, that it's our own property is Blue Heron Park. So I'm going to let Michael talk about that, but I think in regarding Blue Heron Park and some of the items and issues we have there. So with that, Michael, please.
There we go. Mr. Manager, thank you. Mayor, Commissioners, Michael Gold, law firm, environmental counsel for the town of Cutler Bay. It's a pleasure to be here talking about this issue. We didn't intend to open up an investigation of Blue Heron Park. We didn't anticipate finding what we have encountered. This investigation arose out of the ongoing cleanup of Legacy Park. And as part of that ongoing cleanup, we were attempting to demonstrate that some of the chemicals identified at Legacy Park were legacy chemicals as a result of agricultural activities all over this subregion, which makes a lot of sense logically and intuitively, and it would have been a very practical way to proceed. One way to make that showing to the regulators who ultimately decide whether you've made a sufficient showing is to conduct something called a background investigation, where you go off-site to other properties that haven't had a documented release and evaluate the chemical composition of soil at those locations. And if the chemical composition at those locations, off-site and unconnected to your site, is similar to the chemical composition of soil at your subject property, here that would be Legacy Park, then the conclusion would be, the scientific conclusion would be that this contamination is widespread and not the result of a release at a particular property, which then mitigates the amount of work that you have to do and reduces the risk of harm to public health and the environment. What we found, though, when we picked Blue Heron Park as one of these locations for the background study is an anomalous signature of the chemicals in soil, indicating that perhaps we didn't have the rather innocent legacy of widespread agricultural impacts, which are well known and well understood, but maybe something more site-specific that occurred at this particular property. That initial testing was done in January of this year. And as a result of our findings, we expanded that investigation, stepping out deeper into the park. We started at the northern end of the park, and that's mainly where we've concentrated our investigation. We conducted supplemental sampling in March of this year and again in May of this year. And what we found was the impacts, which are limited to arsenic, which is found everywhere in Cutler Bay and everywhere in Miami-Dade County, but just high enough that it creates a risk of concern for use of the property as a public park. We quickly concluded that we didn't have enough information along the breadth of the park to continue to allow it to be used as a public park safely until we got our arms around the extent of the impacts over the entire footprint of the park. And so working with the town manager, who acted very quickly and very responsibly and very ethically, we've closed down the park, prevented direct access while we continue the investigation. In the meanwhile, we're working collaboratively and cooperatively with the Miami-Dade County Department of Environmental Resources Management, charged with oversight and management of these types of cleanups and protection of public health from a government perspective, to design the fullness and the appropriateness of the investigation that we're implementing. Ultimately, what will be required here is simply scraping the park, removing the topsoil down to 6 or 12 inches, below which you encounter something called competent limestone, which is where we believe the arsenic impacts end. and we'll bring back in either clean fill and sod on top of that, and the park will reopen. Under the direction of the town manager, we are moving rapidly, responsibly, but rapidly. We don't want this to be a situation where the park is closed for an indeterminate period of time. We know it's important to your residents. And so we're going to bring that park back online just as quickly as possible without any delay. And I believe that we can complete the investigation, the removal of impacted soil and its replacement. Best case scenario, 6 months. Worst case scenario, 9 months, which is very quick as far as these things go. If you look around the county at other parks that have been closed down, some have been closed for years. That's not going to be the situation here. The town manager has put together a great team, and his charge to us, again, is work very closely with the regulators, make sure the public is protected, and so are the town's environmental resources. The last part of the story I have to tell you, and then I'm happy to entertain any questions, is the expense of all of this. Not cheap, but not all of the money in the world. It's a very manageable project, and we feel that there are very viable opportunities to recapture all of the dollars that we'll be spending in connection with the investigation, with our legal representation, with the source removal, with closing down the park, and with replacing the impacted soil with clean soil to make it healthy again. Some of those parties include the professionals who are involved in the acquisition of the property. We feel that there should have been better communication about the risk presented by taking this site, given its history. And so we'll have some conversations with those professionals and perhaps their insurance companies. And under statutory law and common law, the town also has rights to go against the prior owners and operators of the property who are in the chain of title. And I'm not going to bore you with environmental law. I'll put you to sleep quickly, but take it on good authority that there are avenues of cost recapture there as well. In sum, we're going to work through this process quickly, responsibly, in compliance with all applicable law, providing the notices that we need to provide. The town manager has assembled a top team of professionals, and we feel that even though there's some money to be spent on the front end, we're going to get that money back for the town. I'm happy to respond to any questions that you might have. Thank you.
You said that you have to scrape it. Why can't you just encapsulate it with additional soil on top of it?
Well, from an engineering perspective, that may be very difficult with respect to the way stormwater flows and the other amenities that the park provides. The more efficient solution here and the more permanent solution may in fact be source removal. But Mr. Mayor, you're absolutely correct. The remedy that you're suggesting, which in the business is called an engineering control or capping by bringing in either pervious or impervious material to prevent direct contact and perhaps inhibit leaching of contamination beneath the clean fill layer when stormwater infiltrates through it. That is a commonly recognized and many times more appropriate and more efficient option. There are some disadvantages associated with a clean cap, including the perpetual obligation to inspect it on an ongoing basis to make sure that the cap doesn't degrade, which then requires more money be spent to repair and maintain that part of the cap which has been degraded. And there may also, again, be an issue with something that I mentioned in passing a few moments ago called leachability. Clean soil, while it provides effective protection against direct exposure, it doesn't prevent the infiltration of stormwater from getting into the contaminated media or the soil beneath the cap. And some of these soils may have a chemical property that allows for the passing of the chemical through the soil into the aquifer below when the rainwater infiltrates into it. And therefore, from a technical perspective, even though the clean soil cap is effective to protect human health, it may fail completely from a leachability perspective because it doesn't prevent degradation of the aquifer. And the charge that I know you believe in and the council believes in and the town manager believes in is that we have to simultaneously protect human health and the environment.
Thank you. Councilman Duncan.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just really quickly, and please forgive my ignorance or naivete on the subject matter. You had mentioned a potential 6 to 12 inches worth of soil being removed. I guess my question would be, when you were taking samples, did you have any samples that were lower or beyond that 12-inch marker? My only fear is that if you only remove the 6 to the 12, what are the odds historically, scientifically, that that's not enough?
Okay, so that's a brilliant question. That's very intuitive. And I work with a lot of really good environmental lawyers and engineers who don't know to ask that question. So here, the reason why we're not going below 12 inches is because at that level, at that layer, we encounter something called competent limestone. I mentioned that at the top of my presentation. And competent limestone doesn't carry the arsenic, doesn't present a risk of exposure to human health or the environment. So currently, that's where we're anticipating that we need to stop. But further to your point, the regulators at the county have asked us to demonstrate, in fact, that we have this strata, this layer, this lithologic layer called competent limestone. And there's a technical presentation that needs to be made. And when we shared that concern with the town manager said to us, well, we need data because the people who live here need to be able to be confident that you've stopped where you need to stop. So one of the investigations that we will be initiating in the next 2 or 3 weeks is a geotechnical investigation to do a further investigation of that competent limestone and develop what are called lines of evidence or several different types of scientific justifications that it's appropriate to stop at 12 inches and not go any deeper.
And I think Mayor, oh, sorry, if there was any more questions. Vice Mayor.
Vice Mayor? Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. Just to reemphasize a couple points that you brought up. We are indeed looking at the culpability of the professionals that we hired to do the initial environmental study on this property. That's correct, right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Because this is, I just want the residents to understand this is not our fault.
It is completely not the town's fault.
Correct. In any time you purchase a property, there is a due diligence, right? And especially on vacant properties, environmental studies are mandatory, right? Prior to the closing on the property. So we relied on a expert that we hired to give us accurate information, right? Prior to us accepting the property. And it appears that that information that we got was inaccurate. So I'm assuming that we're taking the appropriate steps there. In addressing the comment about the prior ownership, I just want to tread lightly there, because it would be one thing if the prior owners knew of such an issue, right, and failed to disclose it prior to the sale, right, versus not knowing. And then again, because the sellers are not required to do the environmental study, right? It's the purchasers that are correct.
That is correct, Councilman.
Yeah. So the prior owners did not, and I'm not speaking for them, but I would assume they did not have knowledge of it, or would they be required to become privy to that prior to the sale of the property? It's the buyer's responsibility. So I think that the total culpability falls upon the environmental expert that we hired that gave us the inaccurate information versus really pursuing the previous owner on a platform that they were unaware of, if that makes sense. So,
I understand.
perfect. Thank you so much.
And
Ralph.
Vice Mayor, our priority is going to be, just like you mentioned, is for the contract, the consultant who gave us the green light to acquire the property. So we are 100% target on there. That's what we're charged with. At the same time, that part of chasing the liability after going after the company's insurance carrier, still we're going to move forward with the closure of the park and expedite the cleanup of the park. So, and nothing is going to happen, Councilman Duncan, as you mentioned, until we get a approved methodology, or I call it soil management plan, maybe. I'm learning so much about brownfields now, right? From Miami County Durham. So it's not like we're like shooting at the sky. No, we're in collaboration with Miami County Durham, side by side with them. So yes, this is what you could do, and then that's going to be the scope of work for our contractor. All right. Thank you, Michael,
You're welcome.
for your work on the Legacy Park as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much.